So let's say you're inside a prison cell. And inside the cell you're chained with a number of chains. And there's a lock on each chain. And of course a lock on the door. You want to be free of the prison cell. So now you have two teachers that appear outside the cell. And one of those teachers is saying, the prison cell and the chains are just illusions. Don't focus any attention on them. Don't worry about them. Just look out the window. Just look at me and look at this wonderful blue sky that's outside the window. Just focus all of your attention on that blue sky. And one day you will awaken from the illusion and you will see that the prison cell wasn't actually there and you will be outside the cell. If you can believe this, go for it. I have no problem with that. But there is another window on the other wall of the cell. It's just a little prison, you see, square, built out in the open. So on that window there's another teacher who says, listen, of course it's temporary that you are in the prison. But there's only one way to escape the prison. And that is, you must unlock each chain and then unlock the door. So look over in that corner. There's a pile of keys. You crawl over there and you start taking one key at a time and fitting it in one lock. And you keep going until you find a key that matches the lock. You unlock that first chain. Take that off. And you go to the next chain. You look for the lock that fits that chain and you unlock that. And you keep going until there's only one key left on the floor and you have no chains on you. That key will fit the door. When you unlock the prison door, you can walk out and then you will be free in the sunshine outside. So, which approach would you rather follow? The systematic path where you unlock one chain at a time until you can walk out the door on your own, or the instantaneous direct path where you focus on the sky, ignore the chains, and wait for this instant awakening where you're suddenly transported outside the prison cell. You see, this is the difference between taking a dualistic approach and a non-dual approach to overcoming your personal suffering and achieving a higher state of consciousness. And it really only requires you to gain a basic understanding of duality. Instead of focusing on non-duality, we're going to look at what makes up the prison cell, what makes up all the chains that are binding you right now. And we can start by a simple question. I mean, if you feel that you are completely free right now, if you have no suffering, if you are where you want to be, if you are awakened or enlightened, then obviously you can ignore this video. But if you don't feel you're where you want to be, you need to ask yourself, why am I not where I want to be? And the answer to that is duality. So what is duality on a practical level? In the last video I talked about it on a more abstract theoretical level. So duality, as I said, there is no real duality in the world. Because in the mind of Brahman or God or the Creator or Source, whatever you want to call it, there's no duality. Right? Brahman created the world out of itself And therefore Brahman knows that everything in the world, all the differentiated forms, came out of itself. So where can duality exist? It can't exist in the mind of Brahman, it can't exist in any real sense. No, you can't point, what I'm saying is, you can't point to something and say, here's duality. This is what many of these non-dual teachers will do. They will say, oh, here's black and here's white, this is duality. But as I hopefully made clear in the previous video, that's just not the case. Black and white are not dualistic. It's not a dualistic polarity. Dualistic polarity is when you add a value judgment, good and bad. And where can that value judgment exist? Only in our minds. That means duality exists only in our minds. It is a state of mind, a state of consciousness. So, if we look at humankind, right? Let's just take a look at people. I talked about it in the first video. There are some people that we call sociopaths, narcissists, psychopaths, because they are totally focused on themselves. So what we can say is that there is a scale of human consciousness ranging from lower states of consciousness to higher states of consciousness. And with lower, I mean the more people are focused on themselves and the less they care about other people or the consequences for other people, the lower their state of consciousness. So we can see that there's a certain percentage of humankind that are in this very low state of consciousness, completely selfish. Then there's a small group of people that seem to have overcome this selfishness. They are not focused on themselves. They wouldn't hurt other people, certainly not deliberately. So they're clearly in a higher state of consciousness. And then we can see that the biggest part of humanity are somewhere in between those two. So we can say that there's a certain scale where you're at the lowest state of consciousness, most self-centered, most self-focused. Now, what causes you to be completely self-focused? It's actually duality, the duality consciousness. The more self-focused you are, the deeper you have gone into the duality consciousness. The more illusions you have created, the more chains you have bound yourself with inside the prison cell. So we could say that, and this is actually found in many spiritual traditions, that the vast majority of humankind are inside a prison cell. Not physically, but in their minds. Most people have stepped into this dualistic state of consciousness. That is like stepping inside the prison cell and closing the door. And then most people have also taken on some more specific dualistic illusions, which is like putting the chains on inside the cell. And the more illusions people have taken on, the lower is their state of consciousness, meaning the more self-centered, self-focused, and selfish they are. But here's the trick that most people don't see. The more dualistic illusions you take on, the more you suffer. And so what we see is that we have some people that are very self-focused. Now you can take what I've used many times in my videos, a dictator who is completely ruthless, is willing to kill anybody who opposes his reign, willing to start a war that kills millions of people. And you may look at a dictator and say, oh, but he's got great power. Millions of people will do whatever he tells them to do. Yes, but if you look at his psychological state, he is actually suffering because he's under enormous stress, enormous strain. Can't be proven wrong, can't do anything wrong, must always make the right decision. So actually, the more selfish people are, the more they suffer. then you can see people who have started unlocking the chains inside the cell and maybe even opening the door. They are not suffering. And of course, most people are somewhere in between. They are suffering, but they are not completely self-centered and self-focused. So, what is it that makes the difference? Why is it that when you go into the duality consciousness, you will suffer? Well, in order to explain this, we have to understand the central feature of duality. Duality creates a polarity. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha talked about this. He called it the pairs. So there's a pair of opposites. And they are opposites in every way. But those dualistic opposites are not black and white, or liquid and solid. There's always the value judgment. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false, this is real, this is unreal. There is always the differentiation or the value judgment that this is good, this is not good. This should be, this shouldn't be. And that means that when you go into duality, you will, without realizing it, you will pick one of these dualistic opposites. And you will say, this is the ultimate. This is good. This is truth. But the dualistic polarity you pick has an opposite polarity. And there will be other people who pick that one and say, this is the absolute truth. For example, some people will say, Christianity is the only true religion. Others will say, Islam is the only true religion. And soon enough, you have the Crusades. Capitalism is the only true economic system. Communism is the only true economic system. And suddenly, you have the Cold War, or the Korean War, or the Vietnam War. And so what I'm saying is that duality is a state of mind that you can go into, that people go into, that most people on earth have gone into. And what they do in duality is they pick a side. They pick a polarity. And it's a relative polarity. And then they will say, and it's relative. Why is it relative? Because it's only defined in opposition to the opposite polarity. This is right, that is wrong. This is right compared to, relative to what is wrong. And what that means is that there is an existential built-in tension in the duality consciousness. Because there's always the opposition between the two. You are picking one, somebody else is picking the other, and now you have the tension. Because what is it that happens in duality? Well, when you go into duality, when you become blinded by duality, you don't see that the polarity you picked is relative to the other. You think yours is the absolute, is the ultimate. Be very careful here. This is a very subtle point to get, because I met many people, and myself included when I didn't fully grasp what duality is, who will say, well, but there must be something that's true. For example, there must be a religion that's true. That's the ultimate religion. Really? Does there have to be one religion that's ultimate? Who says so? Oh yeah, every religion says so about themselves, their own religion. But as I said, you can look at things completely neutrally. You could say, what's the problem on earth? Is that people have stepped into these dualistic illusions. What would then be the real purpose of religion? To help people free themselves from these dualistic illusions. And if they free themselves from the dualistic illusions, they will not see themselves as being in opposition to other people. They will not be willing to kill other people. So, if a religion really helps people escape duality, you can say that's a valid religion. But there could be more than one religion that did that. So what does that mean? It means that when people are in this mindset, we have the only true religion, because it's given by God and our scriptures were given by God. They are in the dualistic state of mind. And they are promoting the dualistic struggle between people. So you see what I'm trying to say here is, you go into duality, you pick a truth that is actually relative. But you in your mind elevate it to the status of being absolute. And that means it's infallible. It couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be proven wrong. But there are those other people who have an opposite truth to yours. And they are threatening your sense that you have the absolute truth. So how far are you going to go? How far are you willing to go in order to silence them? Are you willing to kill them all? Kill all the members of the other religion? So that there's no opposition? But you see what I've been trying to say here. In duality, there's always opposition. You could potentially have a situation where Christians had killed all members of other religions. But what would happen instantly? Another religion would pop up somewhere that people would begin to believe in. Because in the dualistic mindset, there must be opposition. There always will be opposition. And this opposition between the two dualistic polarities is what creates struggle. It creates struggle in your mind individually because you have picked a certain dualistic polarity and it gives you a certain view of the world. And your entire mind, your entire attention is focused on validating, defending, upholding that worldview. It must be validated. It cannot be challenged. But other people have the opposite view, and they also feel a need to validate their view, so there's going to be struggle. So you're going to struggle inside your own mind to validate your worldview, and you're potentially going to have struggles with other group of people who have the opposite dualistic view. And that's what shows you the real cause of all the conflict you see in history. One group of people is in one dualistic extreme, another group of people is in the opposite. They are both seeking to establish their relative extreme as the absolute truth, and it can't be done. It's an impossible quest from the very beginning. And you look at all the conflicts that have happened throughout history, and when you see this, you see the futility of it. The absolute, complete futility that one dualistic truth could ever dominate Earth, could ever be the only truth. It's completely futile. It's what it says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And when you see this, it can be shocking because you can see that maybe you have believed in a certain truth and it wasn't real, but it's also enormously liberating. Because you can stop defending this out there, but you can also start looking at your own worldview and your beliefs and begin to question. Are they actually dualistic? Are they actually causing my suffering? Are they making me less free or more free? And that is really, in a sense, when your the process of your liberation from duality begins. When you see this, the central feature of duality, there's always a struggle, and it's existential. You can't overcome it from duality. Just step back a little bit. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that once people are trapped in this prison of the dualistic state of mind, the dualistic state of consciousness, people are suffering because there's a struggle. They don't understand what I just said about duality. They think they are struggling because they have the absolute truth, but somebody else is opposing it. And therefore, from the dualistic state of mind, through the filter of duality, they can see only one solution. They must destroy the opposition. But what I'm saying is, the two opposite polarities are built into duality. They are inescapable. You cannot overcome duality by having one dualistic polarity destroy the opposite, because they can't destroy the opposite. So what can you do? What's the escape? What's the way out? You can transcend the dualistic state of consciousness. And that is what all true spiritual teachings are about. But because the dualistic state of consciousness is as subtle and pervasive as it is, it can't happen just like that. It happens gradually, because there's a lot of illusions that are chaining you inside the prison cell of duality. And you must unlock the chains one by one. If you did it all at once, you wouldn't know who you were. You would have a complete identity crisis. That's why, going back thousands of years, there are spiritual traditions that emphasize a gradual path. A gradual path, where you only get certain knowledge when the teacher evaluates that you're ready for it. And so, in a sense, what many people want in today's world, they want this instant gratification that we've become so addicted to ever since we got these small pieces of plastic called credit cards. And so they look at spirituality and they find this spiritual teaching that says, yes, if you follow a gradual path and in 10 or 20 years you might achieve some results. And they say, oh, I can't wait that long, I want something right now. And then they find these non-duality teachers that say, oh yeah, it's all a dream, you can just awaken by shifting your perspective. And yes, you can have a certain awakening experience. Yes, but it doesn't mean you have unlocked all the chains. And it doesn't mean you are outside the prison cell. You might see at least a glimpse of what life is like outside the prison cell, but you're still chained inside the cell because you have these dualistic illusions that you haven't unraveled. And for a time you may feel euphoric, but then reality comes back. You're reacting to this situation, you're reacting to that situation, and either you can fool yourself for a while that you are awakened, or you come to a point where you realize, gosh, I still have some unresolved psychology. What do I do now? And what I'm saying is, why not accept from the very beginning? It's a gradual path. It takes time, because there's a lot of these dualistic illusions that are keeping me trapped inside the prison cell. But at least what you can do is you can begin to understand the central feature of these dualistic illusions. Always two opposites. And the solution, the freedom, is never to elevate one to some ultimate status or destroy the other. You have to transcend both of them. Now be careful. I'm not saying this is an illustration of two dualistic polarities. And of course you can define a middle ground, a line in between them, and say there are gradations. And you could come to a midpoint. This is the midpoint between capitalism and communism. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about finding a midpoint. I'm talking about transcending the entire scale, the entire duality consciousness. And that's what you do when you follow this gradual path of seeing one illusion or one pair of illusions at a time. And that's what I'll talk more about in coming videos.